everybody. I'm Beatty and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. And isn't that the truth that the world needs now more now than probably ever before? Love, sweet love. And that's something that we can also translate into our own personal lives and into our own personal relationships as well. So we have been now listening to the Ask Beatty Show. 2025 is going to be going on to 13 years. And as I was preparing for today's show, I wanted to be sure, and I'm not sure that I have done a sufficiently good job in really thanking all of you for tuning in every single week for all of these years. And I know that many of you have actually really been listening to the show for the past 12 years. And I know that there are a lot of other options. There are a lot of other things that you could be doing at 3 o'clock New York City time every Monday. And I really do hope, and I know that I say this every single week, that there is some little thing, that there is some topic, that there is some motivation that I am able to give to you that really does make a difference in your life. Because the reality is that this show is really about you, and it is about trying to see how we all can go about improving the quality of our lives and the quality of our relationships. Now, I must say that for a few of you who are tuning in perhaps for the very first time, and you're wondering who is Beatty Confredos, well, I am a psychotherapist and I'm also a sex therapist. I'm the author of a groundbreaking book on relationships, for better, for worse, forever. Discover the path to lasting love, and what this book is about. I did research with 450 people in the Boston, Providence, and Connecticut area, and I came up with a 10-step formula that teaches all of us how to assess. And I know that the word assess and evaluate when it comes to our relationships, it's not sexy and it's not lovey-dovey, but it's absolutely critical. So the book teaches you how to assess who is right for you and who is wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. And the book came out in 2000. And, what I've really hoped over the years is that we were going to see an improvement. I mean, there've never ever been so many self-help books and therapists and love coaches and talk about mental health and relationships. And last night I was watching a television show called Ultimatum that was hosted by Nick Lachey and his wife. And I was really hoping over the years that we would see a fast improvement in how people were doing in their relationships. But the fact is that there doesn't seem to be really any improvement at all. And in fact, I am continually writing in my Ask Beatty column. I'm the advice columnist for Dance Papers in the Hamptons and Palm Beach, that we are on a downward spiral. The reality is, if we're looking at marriage, the divorce rate for first marriages is 48%. The divorce rate for second marriages is 67%. And one would hope, right, if you're marrying for the third time or the fourth time, that you are going to do a better job in choosing your partner. However, the divorce rate for third marriages is between 71 and 72%. And I was talking to somebody who's been working in the domestic violence field for many, many, many years. And over all these years, the statistics tell us that 3 women continue to be killed every single day by their so-called intimate partner. So clearly, we are missing the boat. And, I must say that I have reached out to hundreds of organizations over the years, high schools, universities, colleges, organizations, religious organizations of various different kinds. And I have to say that regardless of my particular expertise and experience, and some might say notoriety, I have found that the majority simply really don't care about this issue. I mean, we have an opportunity with our kids in the school, beginning at the first grade level, to really start to teach them about relationships and communication and problem solving. And yet we have really dropped the bar. And I think that we continue to fool ourselves thinking that we are really making progress. But what I am continuing to do, of course, is to try and reach out and give presentations and workshops and teach people what I have discovered, the three things that we all need to learn and the three things that we all need to actually do if we are ever hoping to have and to find a happy and healthy relationship with anyone. And just to summarize, and I know that I say this all the time, the three things are: number one, each of us needs to be in a good place emotionally, psychologically, psychiatrically. We need to be willing to do some work and take care of our issues, typically beginning in our own family of origin, our depression, our anxiety, other psychiatric problems that we may be struggling with, our early child sexual abuse, our substance abuse, because we need to be okay. And as I used to tell my daughter when she was much younger, that the relationships need to be the icing on the cake. And we need to be the cake. And that's absolutely critical if we're just hoping and dreaming and that somebody is going to rescue us, rescuing the damsel in distress. The probability is that it is not going to happen. And number two, again, with all the talk in the media about relationships, we really need to be clear on the ingredients that go into a healthy relationships. It's got to be more than we share the same foods and the same travel destinations. And number three is the formula. The formula keeps us safe. It empowers us. It forces us to keep our eyes and ears wide open. And in going through this assessment process, and by the way, one of the depressing things for me, because in my personal life, I'm probably one of the most impatient people that you are ever going to want to meet professionally. Of course, it's different. My formula and research found that it really takes about a year to find out who somebody is and who somebody is not. And you cannot fast forward the progress. But this is a guide. It's like having me taking you by the hand and showing you the terrain of what you really have to look for and look out for if you are going to be safe in your relationships and if you are going to actually be able to find a happy and healthy connection. And obviously, if you're seeing a lot of red flags, early on, you're not going to stay in for a year. I think what people tend to do is that we make a lot of excuses. We make a lot of excuses. We second guess ourselves. We don't trust our instincts. And of course, if we grew up in a situation where volatility and dysfunction and perhaps abuse and toxicity was part of our environment growing up, that kind of, in a way, became our norm. And as an adult, we need to recognize that even though that may have been and still may be our comfort zone and our comfort level, that staying in that zone is absolutely not in our best interest. It is destructive, it is self-destructive, and it will never, ever make us happy. So we have some work to do, and it's always about, do we want to do the work? Because the work is not like going and having, a cocktail or going to a tea party. it's tough. I think it's really, really tough to, look at yourself, look at how you grew up, look at your parents, and, more importantly, looking at the things that we all need to do to make some changes, to make some modifications in our life that will put us in a better place. And ultimately, I mean, nobody can force anybody to do this. When in hosting this show and in writing the articles and in being a psychotherapist and sex therapist, the best I can do is teach people and encourage people in ways to be able to live their lives well, to be able to live their lives genuinely in ways that are good for them. And that's one of the exercises initially that I will give my patients, especially people who've been off track, destructive, self-destructive, self-sabotaging for a good part, if not their entire life. I want them to self-monitor. I want them to be aware. I want them to be able to ask themselves, maybe even multiple times throughout the day, is this, whatever this happens to be, is this in my best interest? Is this good for me? So I have a mantra, which of course, for those of you who've been listening, you've heard me say this many, many times, that I think, responsibility of an adult is to be willing and willing, and to be serious about acknowledging, addressing, and resolving as best as we can. We can't change history. We can't change something that happened a second ago. The issues that continue to get in the way of our lives and our relationships, which is really why every single week I ask you to dig in deep and look at various different aspects of your life and be honest with yourself and ask yourself the question whether or not in fact you are on track. Of course, beginning with your mental health, and hopefully you're feeling good. Hopefully life is going really, really well. But if you are someone, and there are millions of people in the world and in the country who are suffering from depression, anxiety, a variety of different psychiatric ailments, substance abuse of various different kinds, the consequences of having grown up, being in domestic violent relationships, abusive relationships of every kind and description. So it's a question of, where are you really at today? Are you in a good place? And hopefully you are. But if you're finding we're ending the year 2024, it has gone by so, so, so quickly. So for the new year, in asking yourself, are there some things that you actually need to think about, and more importantly, that you actually need to do and put into action to deal with the issues that are hampering you in some way? And I think it's great. We exercise, we want to eat well, we want to get sufficient sleep. We want to make sure that our self-care regime is really on track. But if you're finding that you're doing all those things and that you're still not feeling well, perhaps this is the time to find yourself a good therapist and reach out and get some help. And talking about finding a good therapist, one of the things that when I initially spoke with Dr. Garnell about hosting the Ask Beatty show, I had actually previously hosted a number of Ask Beatty radio shows and television shows before moving to New York. And I think because of people's work schedule, and we're so much these days, on the computer, I think that the call-in counseling agenda that I was hoping that we were going to have, that has really not come to pass. But I do encourage you, if you have questions, if you have comments, that you have for me, all you need to do is go to my beacon.com website and you can email me and we can talk together and see whether or not some of the questions, some of the issues, some of the concerns that you have can be resolved. And I am always very, very happy to hear from listeners and to hear from readers. And we can deal absolutely directly on the Ask Beatty show with your concerns. So again, my website is beacon.com and feel free. Feel free. We can discuss, we can debate, we can agree, we can disagree, but we can engage, and hopefully in that way, I will be able to help you begin to deal and resolve some of the issues that you've been battling with and hopefully will help you gain some resolution to these problems. So in my How Are You Doing segment, mental health, hopefully you're in a good place. If not, what are you going to do about it? And I again suggest that you reach out and ask for help if you're finding that you're on a roller coaster ride that never really stops. And if you're looking at your relationships as well, I mean, this is so critical that we have constructive, supportive, loving people in our lives, not frenemies, where someday they're a friend and someday they're an enemy, and you never quite know who you're going to be expecting, whether you are going to be getting the rod, whether you're going to be getting the stick, or whether you're going to be getting some sugar. So again, in looking at our relationships, how are your relationships? Are you feeling happy? Are you contented with the various different people who you are interacting with on a regular basis? If you happen to be married, how is your marriage? If you're not married and you're dating, how are the relationships that you are currently engaging in? What about family relationships? We talk about family relationships and the joys of holidays. Of course, there's also holiday blues for a lot of people. And I think it's really a question of being honest with ourselves, not fooling ourselves, gaining clarity about what is really going on and not going on in our lives. And if things are going well, please, please continue to do everything that you're doing because obviously you're doing things well. But if you're finding that you're tumbling and you're scrambling and that you're really not in a good place, only you are able to make the decision to take some action to do something that will hopefully change the environment that you're in and hopefully change the relationships and your mental health that you are currently experiencing. And let us not forget about the importance of taking care of our physical health as well. Obesity continues to be a major problem here in the United States. So the importance, and of course, Gary Nell talks about this all the time, the importance of eating well and the importance of supplements and exercise and making sure that you're getting sufficient sleep. And all of this is really about taking care of yourself, being good to yourself, and living your life in ways that are in your best interest. And I wish I was in your living rooms now or in your offices right now, and I could get a sense of where you were at. And again, hopefully you are all at a good place. But we all go through lots and lots of ups and downs in our lives. And if we're off, the question then becomes, what are we going to do? We can whine, we can moan, we can complain, we can hope, we can dream that things are going to change. But what is always necessary is an acknowledgement, being honest with ourselves about what's going on and what's not going on, and then making a concerted plan of action. And I think a lot of people, they plan, but then they fail to follow through with action. So hopefully these are inspirational and motivational words for you, where you will do whatever it is that you need to do beginning today. We don't need to wait for a couple of weeks to begin to live your life better and to begin to live your life in ways that are truly, truly, truly in your best interest. Well, there was an article in the New York Times today, and it was written by a columnist who I regularly read, David French. And the opinion piece, when Me Too became church too. And I just want to read you a couple of paragraphs, and then I'm going to introduce my guest, my husband, Jim Bredos, who is a sociologist, and he is also the host of an amazing television show, The Radical Imagination, which can be seen on multiple channels on MNN, and is also the co-host of a really interesting show in East Hampton called Real Talk. So just to begin this article, when did we know that the Me Too moment was truly over? Gee, I didn't realize that it was over. Hopefully it's not, but this is how this article begins. At its most compelling, Me Too tried to change a culture that both concealed and enabled the illegal abuse of women and imposed hypocritical double standards, holding women to one standard of behavior while celebrating and elevating the unscrupulous men. Well, this is good since it's being written by a man. But events in 2024 have told us loudly and clearly that the moment has passed. I don't agree totally, by the way, that the moment has passed, but I think it is not as strong, the Me Too movement, as it has been. And perhaps it was when reports emerged that Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump's choice to be the next Secretary of Defense, had paid an accuser to settle a sexual assault claim. He denies wrongdoing, but in his defense, that he had consensual sex with a married woman was still dreadful. What was so interesting, his own mother called him an abuser of women in an email to him, and she's since, of course, disavowed her statement. And yet somehow the chances of being confirmed by the Senate appear to be increasing. So we don't care that he abuses women, or we don't care about his character. And then we can move on to Robert Kennedy, who's married to the actress Cheryl Hines. And he allegedly had, in quotes, an improper personal relationship via smartphone with Olivia Nuzzi. So what happened to Olivia Nuzzi? And she was a political reporter, who's much younger and who'd run the Department of Health and Human Services. So what happened to her is she was fired. She was fired, and of course we know that Robert Kennedy is now going to be Donald Trump's health guru. But I think that even more absurd is what happened when we discovered that Donald Trump, responsible for sexual abuse, he was ultimately reelected to the presidency. So I think it's time now for me to have a conversation with my husband, sociologist Jim Fredos. And the bottom line is, and this was a quote in the article too that I love. Yes, people want justice as long as justice costs them little or nothing. So what do you think about all of this, Jim?
I think I'm glad to be here again.
Yeah, glad to have
It's a
you.
wonderful show. Boy, walk back this a little bit. Uh, there's so much to unpack, but let me start this way from, again, more of a sociological and historical viewpoint. Hypocrisy of morality, or how people come to define what is right and wrong, what is godly, what is not, is a very, very long, has a very, very long history. Let me add this, even in the midst of our holiday season here, that more people have been killed in the course of world history as a result of competing visions of morality that different institutions have followed: churches, mosques, synagogues, and so on. Let me repeat that. The sort of morality that we have come to be seen as normal is a hypocritical one. It has caused more harm and violence and death than any other perspective on morality that we've ever had. So the hypocrisy of this is not something that just comes up with Donald Trump. So historically, you talked about your opening about trying to be honest, and I think most people do try to be honest with each other. But what what can we say about a larger society and culture in which we're living in, which is a very, very dishonest one, or certainly one that does not deal with problems over and over and over again? There's a classic work in sociology called written by Gunnar Myrdal, An American Dilemma. It goes way, way back. This is a discussion of race relations. Classic, classic, classic work. And the basic premise there is we say all kinds of things about the existence of racism, and we do nothing about it. So we say one thing, we do another. So the hypocrisy is rift in all our basic institutions. So let me just start by saying that.
Well, let me just say
And
that when
filters through in our family and our
let me
relationships.
just say, right,
Sure.
when you talk about culture, I mean, the culture is made up of people, of individuals. So, for example, if we're looking at the election of Donald Trump, or people looking, the other way about Pete Hegseth, or if people are looking the other way about the sexual abuse that has gone on and that goes on in the churches, I don't think we can call this just culture. I mean, for a variety of reasons, people are choosing. They are choosing on an individual basis, of course, which then becomes the culture, to not deal. They talk about justice, as is the quote in David French's article, as long as justice costs them nothing or very little. So we can talk,
Yeah.
but if we're not prepared to step up, and as you talk about standing in the breaches, the whole thing is phony baloney.
Well, let me again just go back. I know there's different ways of looking at this, but from a sociological point of view, there is what we call society and culture is separate and distinct from the individuals that are involved in it. That there is a culture that has a distinction that we can point to, that perpetuates itself, that can change, and societies that impinge on us, try to control and restrain us. So again, it's not that we're helpless on this. I agree with you that individuals have choices within these cultures. However, some cultures offer more choices and alternatives, and ours is driven by market forces above all else, greed, and individuals may understand that, but still, it's hard to buck that enormous pressure.
And there are consequences.
Yeah.
And in this article, and I love this paragraph, it says, yes, people want justice. They want abuse to stop, but they also don't want to poison their relationships with friends and colleagues or undermine their social status.
Right.
They don't want to say no to kids who ask to go back to their favorite summer camp, even if there was abuse at the camp. They don't want to lose an election. And any sacrifice, no matter how attuned then becomes
But
too
American
much, too
society is not
much.
asking us to sacrifice. It
Right,
is asking us in this holiday season to
right.
spend more.
Yes,
And to save the economy by spending more and more. Now, that's not, I'm making blanket statements here, but and generalizations. I don't mean to be so rigid on that, but overall, there's enormous pressure to abide by what the culture is telling us is appropriate and normal.
and that's exactly, and that's true. So I mean, so here we are with the nation about to be led by a man found liable for sexual abuse. I guess nobody really cares. And look how many women, the majority of women voted for
Well,
Donald Trump, with key members of his chosen senior, and this is a quote, team beset by their own gross scandals, voted into office on the strength of overwhelming white evangelical support. Okay,
well, I told
so
that
nobody cares.
well, they
But they
care,
don't
but
care.
they're caring
They don't care.
to buttress up their own prejudices, their own greed, their own sense of power that they've rationalized. Okay, they'll say they're willing to put up with a Trump because he, in fact, they can get what they want, the Supreme Court justices they want, um, uh, you know, statements that he's going to protect Christians in the society and so on and so on. So that's, I think, what has to be seen as operating. It's an issue of power. And you can see that in hypocrisy and the emotional lack of adjustment, if you want to call it that, within your own therapeutic field, whether
Yes.
you see it more individually, where let's say a father who is now dealing with a daughter who is who he has set up in the past from day one in the relationship to fit certain highly destructive and neurotic needs he may have. Now to call him on that, to tell him that, hey, this is continuing on,
Right.
and that husband is not treating his ex or treated his ex as if she didn't exist, or even his present wife, that, for example. So how do you get people to, stop being hypocritical and come to deal with the consequences of their actions when they're so wedded to actions that keep themselves in their own destructive ways content?
Well, this is why I think it's amazing that progress can be made in this world, in so many ways. And for those of you who've been listening to me for all of these years, I mean, you know that I am about trying to get people to come to a win-win resolution about their issues, whether we're talking about political issues or whether we're talking about personal issues. And there was actually a wonderful article that Jim and I talked about a couple of weeks ago that Dr. Orna Grolnick, who's a psychiatrist, wrote in the opinion page of the New York Times, who talked about, how couples therapy, some of the modalities that we use in couples therapy, can be used in trying to help nations heal. And my letter, which was not published, unfortunately, said that that's all fine and well. However, that for that to happen, whether we're talking about healing relationships and families or healing relationships around the world politically, there has to be some caring. You have to care enough about at least trying to see if your relationships
Or some awareness or consciousness
well, you
for
have to
what needs to be
care.
done.
You have to care, Jim.
Well,
If you don't care, you can have all the consciousness in the world. You have to care enough to want to try to
right.
see
Okay.
if the issues can, in fact, be worked out.
Well, the letter to the editor from her piece,
Dr. Grolnick's piece, yes.
Dr. piece, were almost uniformly by other therapists
Right.
who basically said that in many cases you can't have a win-win relationship situation. Right. You have to just cut out the contempt and the perhaps even the mental illness is so great. The emotional defense mechanisms are so ingrained that at that point, there's nothing you can do but get the hell out. And that may be the case also at a world level. But you
Yes.
try your best
Yes.
and you try to create negotiations or settlements. People don't have to love each other out there in the world scene, but they have to be uh, presented with possible alternatives where they see something they're getting out of it for this to happen. Again, because you're not going to find Hamas and Israeli leadership all huggy wuggy and singing kumbaya together on the border.
But I think, if you want to bring, Hamas and Israel and, relations, family relationships, political relationships, where it seems as if there's just no way to move forward. I was just thinking, you ask Netanyahu, or you ask the leader of Hamas, is this the world that they want for their children and their grandchildren? A
It really
world,
is.
well, you see, if it evidently is,
The leader who was
right,
killed said he's willing to give up 100,000 guns.
right,
But here's the point, Beatty, that you go with people. This is not a win-win.
right.
You go with people, and we've been to Standing Together. We went to the other Israeli Film Festival. I've had Combatants for Peace on the show. Vivian
Silver,
Silver,
who was murdered,
who was
who was a
murdered, and
peace
so on. So
activist,
these
yes.
are the people, and there are people on the other side too that you need to reach out to. And that's the people you work with that has a chance at building it at this organic level,
Right.
from the bottom up, in a sense.
But what I'm seeing as a sociologist, I'm wondering whether you see this as well. And this is something that maybe you and I haven't really talked about. I'm sensing and seeing that the desire for win-win seems to be happening less and less.
In what way?
And that
In
in all
what circumstance?
in all circumstances, and that this
Yeah.
split of I'm right, you're wrong, you're a winner, I'm a loser, that seems to be taking that mindset seems to be taking center stage, where the
But it has always been that way in American history, in a sense. Those who've had certain privileges have wanted to keep, and that's not just in American society. All right, you've had privileges. It's a natural thing for most people who want to maintain and keep those privileges and keep the social relationships, whether it's slavery or Jim Crow or patriarchy, alive and well. And you'll find a lot of people who are confused enough or who are willing to go by that, and they just go along with it.
Well, I think that
Although there are people, one last little point here, when you mentioned about staying in the breach, you do have people who are willing to stand against these forces. They pay a price, oftentimes, like Reverend Barber talking about the heretical nature of these white Christian Baptists and also standing in the breach to speak, and this goes back to Jewish prophetic laws too, traditions, the remnant speaking truth to power. So you have people like that too that are still holding true.
well, let me say something right now, and this is for our audience, but this is also for you, that is probably so politically incorrect. But as we know, if we're talking about standing in the breach during this last election, when our friend Cornel West was running for president, these characters were not standing in the breach. Most did not. He got 50,000 votes in this country.
And what did they get in return? They got Trump.
They got
Trump.
They
So
got Trump. They got Trump.
Their
Right.
backbone was not strong enough.
Right.
So it's a moment
Right.
in a movement. There are other times the battle is not over. And
so but people had an opportunity. I mean, you talk about, Bernie Sanders, you talk about our friend
Bernie and all that, and
Reverend Barber, who we know and we love, but they were not there to support a candidate who they have supposedly embraced, for all these years, his philosophies, his thinking.
Look, none of us are sure.
During a time that mattered, during a time that really mattered. So we're talking phony baloney. We're talking about talking the talk and not
But I think
walking
we
the
need to
walk.
be less, I think we need to be less harsh. We're all, we all make our mistakes. And that's what we go, so many of us go to therapy.
These weren't mistakes.
Well,
These were not mistakes, Jim.
look, there were
People make
fears.
choices.
There were fears.
Fears of what? And this
Fears
is
of
what
supporting one candidate that would siphon off votes
well
that would then
this
put Trump in.
right.
Now they were wrong.
So they put him in.
Well, they
Okay.
didn't put him in.
Sure they did.
More
Sure they
white
did.
evangelicals who
Sure they
everybody
did.
else. I think that article pointed out that but Trump won 65 or 65 points,
Yes, right.
and on white evangelicals, and everyone else, he was 18 points behind.
Yeah, well,
Okay, so a lot of work has to be. They're not, and we're not trying to dump totally on them as well.
right.
So well,
You either stand up for what you believe and accept the consequences, which can sometimes be very dire, or you don't, or you talk the talk, and when it comes time to take action, you're nowhere. And this is what happens. This is what happens. And of course, I see this in people's personal relationships. You know, when my book was first coming out and I was interviewed, you know, by everybody, all in the media, everywhere, they would ask me, so Beatty, what are the most important ingredients that actually make or break a relationship? And I used to smile and say, look, this isn't sexy, this isn't lovey-dovey, but it happens to be a desire and having the sufficient skills to communicate and problem solve and actually, you know, dig in deep. And when issues arise, you're willing to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as you can the issues that are getting in the way of your life and your relationship. And that's a fact. And what
mainstream media wasn't going to listen to that.
They were not going to.
They were just interested in a story, not necessarily
right.
following through.
Right.
The independent journalists would be the people to go to.
Right.
That you had a chance at listening listening to this and making something of it.
Yeah.
And so it's lessons to be learned,
yeah.
as you would say.
Well, lessons to be learned. And of course we need to take care of ourselves. And I know, and I've said to you before the show today, that, you know, I've paid a price, I think, in certain circumstances by speaking up, and at least in my view, telling it like it really is. And I'm going to tell my listeners a story that you have heard, of course, many, many times. And this was a story that happened when The View, the television show, The View, was starting. My book had just come out. And lo and behold, I had a call from Barbara Walters. I mean, everybody knows Barbara Walters, and she was the executive producer of The View. And we had a long talk, and it went really well. And I was on my way to New York to come and audition for The View. And I was beyond excited. And she told me, she said, look, she said, I need for you to talk to one of my producers, and you two will set it all up, and you'll be on your way, and looking forward to meeting you. Well, I called one of her head producers, and this producer, she was rude, she was short, and I learned a very important lesson. I called back Barbara's office, and I told her, left a message, and I said, your executive producer was rude. She was unprofessional, but nonetheless, I'm really looking forward to meeting you and auditioning for The View. And guess what happened? I was right in my experience, in communicating my experience to Barbara, but I made a big mistake, and I paid a price, and I never heard back from Barbara Walters or The View or the producers. And
Look,
you talk about lessons to be learned.
Lessons to be learned. One could be talking about in the media, in the academic world, in the political world, and so on. I don't know Barbara Walters. I don't know much about her. She may have had a personality where she demanded, sort of like a little bit like Trump,
yes,
a certain loyalty.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You didn't know that, and you sort of naively went into the situation.
It was a big mistake, and I mean, I thought it was important. I thought it was
Yeah.
important to let her know that her head person.
But she
What-
made a big mistake in not having all.
Well,
So that's a
she
maybe small compensation for you.
No,
But
no,
that's
no
what.
compensation.
No, I
No
mean I'm not talking
compensation. No,
monetary.
no, 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 no emotional compensation, Jim. I lost a big opportunity. But the fact was, I did learn something, and I think I have been more careful. But you do pay a price when you speak up.
Yeah,
You do. And
we
you
all
have to be
do.
willing, right? You
You
have
do
to
to a
be
certain
willing to pay the price. And in this article again, and I quoted again, that we want justice as
Mhm.
long as justice costs
Doesn't bother us.
people nothing or very little.
It does
Bottom
cost
line,
us.
it
It
does.
should.
It
And it
does.
does.
It
And
does.
to make
It
up for
does.
past wrongs and so on. And the more we keep putting it off, the more difficult it becomes.
Yeah.
And you just try the best you can. You bear witness. Now,
Yeah.
that's the same by Ellie Wiesel. I don't mean to put Ellie down, but it was terrific in bearing witness to the Holocaust. But truth be told, he did not extend that that perspective to the plight and the pain of the Palestinians. That was a blind spot with him.
Mhm,
All right.
mhm.
So, we all were, if we've got,
Nobody's perfect.
nobody's perfect.
Right,
Right.
right,
And we
right,
just do the best we can. We try to call people, including ourselves.
right,
So I
right,
think
right.
being a little more humble is helpful as well. And of course, we're at the time of year, um, where all these, again, these religious forces are playing on us, and the hypocrisy is just dripping.
But you know what I think? I think that there are certain things that we have no control over. I mean, really, we don't. But what we can take control of is for better for worse is our lives and our relationships and the people who we choose to let into our lives. And I think this is where we have to be very, very careful and take an honest look. It's the end of the year. Of course, I ask people to do this every single week and ask ourselves really, who stays, who goes, who are we able to negotiate differences with, who are we able to try and resolve conflicts with, which is ideal, especially if you're dealing with family and intimate people who you really care about. But if you get to a point where you see that there's nobody to talk to, there's nobody to communicate with, there's nobody to problem solve to, then we have to be willing, as hard as it is, to give ourselves permission to exit these kinds of dysfunctional relationships.
Yeah, if they are very destructive, absolutely. One needs to do that, and that's a price that needs to be paid. I mean, one thing I would quibble with you a little bit is that we're not alone here.
No.
I just did a show, of course, with Alan Haber, who's now 89, who was a very close friend and colleague of Tom Hayden, of SDS fame and New Left. And it was basically a half dozen people that got together and decided that we're going to do this. And we're going to have a Port Huron statement, and a total 30 or 40 people brought about, or it more correctly, sociologically, the time was right for people to read this material, and it struck a chord, and it began to be expanded. So it's fascinating because we don't know when these times are going to be available, and you do what you can do. Like you say, you prod and you cajole, and you find out, well, is this the time that this person can be reached?
Well, I mean, if
Or not.
if we're looking at, the whole Me Too movement, we're looking at sexual abuse.
Right.
And if we're looking at how the majority of women in this country, voted for Trump, supported Robert Kennedy, support church people who have been found to, sexually abuse parishioners, then
But what I
it
would do as a social scientist here,
is
and
what?
one needs to separate one as some sort of moralist here, and I'll explain that in just a second. But as a social scientist, what you do is survey, question, ask these people what was in their mind. What is their story? What
Their
is their narrative?
story,
No, but you can't,
obviously,
you gotta do it
but Jim,
first. You can't make it for them.
their
They gotta be heard.
story, obviously,
No, no,
the
not
facts,
this.
knowing the facts that we have a sexual predator and a group of sexual predators that he has appointed, and women who, of course, are supporting him and now have a variety of different, very key positions in the administration. It's very clear that they don't care about the issue. If you care about
their power,
they care about their power.
Career,
That's
and moving on.
That's exactly
well. You had that.
right.
You don't have to go into Trump. You had Bill Clinton. I mean, and the Clintons.
Right.
You know what? I'm going to say something that may surprise you. I mean, I remember one of the, I think it was the debate with Trump and Hillary, and I was listening and I was dozing off, and then Trump caught my ear. Hillary was going on in a moralistic way. Well, we need to about the tax uh, codes and all that and stuff. And Trump simply said, "You know what? When you change it, I'll abide by it."
Right. Right.
And wow,
Right.
he was right.
Right.
There's hypocrisy at every level.
Right. Right.
So
right.
Clinton had the power.
Right.
And we can go on, and that's just dumping on Clinton, but we can go on and on with all kinds of
And this is why, this morning I was actually out and I heard some people talking about how they no longer want to read the Times. They don't want to look at the news anymore.
Well,
but the one thing,
what are they going to do?
The one thing, of course, people who listen to the Ask Beatty show, they don't normally, get this kind of really wonderful, in-depth, political analysis. They get psychological commentary and analysis, for me. But I think that we have to be really aware and careful who we do let into our personal lives. I mean, that is something that we do have, we do have control over.
It does take a while, as you pointed
out. Right. And, when
people can change.
Right.
Some people can.
And,
some people can't.
When I found these wonderful brutal truths that Anthony Hopkins wrote. I mean, again, I want to just read a couple of them. It's 3:53. I don't even know where the time has gone, Jim. These are important words. I had no idea. When I think of Anthony Hopkins, of course, I think of the movie that he was in.
What's it?
Right.
Fisher? Not Fisher.
Right. What was it? Something of the Lambs, or
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs. But this is what
Jodie Foster.
Yes, Jodie Foster. But this is what he says: to be able to let go of people who are not ready to love you. This is the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do in your life. It will also be the most important. And stop having difficult conversations with people who don't want to change and who have no desire to hear anybody else's perspective. We spend all this time and energy trying to engage with people who have no interest in entertaining any other.
That goes for Trump. He's not going to entertain other viewpoints, but we still have to engage in the political process. So those who aren't reading the Times, I mean, it's sort of stupid here. Read keep up to date. You can disagree with the Times, but go ahead with some of these other sayings. I agree,
and stop showing up. And this is something, that I see in my practice a lot, where people are showing up for the unavailable person, the person who will probably never be there for you, whether you're talking about someone who you think you're in love with, or really a colleague or anybody. To stop showing up for people who are not interested in you, who are not interested in your presence. We think that by going the extra mile and chasing them and running after them and giving them accolades, that's something that's going to change. But we have to stop doing this. It is so self-destructive. It is so self-sabotaging. It makes us feel so badly about ourselves. And if we are entertaining,
these women who got their jobs, they're not feeling bad about it.
No, that's true.
They may feel bad after the 5 or 6 years of doing this. Then they'll come to realization.
And I want to read something else here, because this is so important. He says that I know your instinct is to do everything possible to gain the appreciation of those around you, but it's an impulse that steals your time and energy and mental and physical health.
Yeah.
We have to stop chasing people who are not interested in us.
Because there's enough really good, wonderful
Right.
people out there.
Exactly.
And we need to
Exactly.
say that for the holiday season too.
No, it's
For
true.
all seasons.
And another line here that I think is so critical, it doesn't mean you have to change who you are, but what it does mean is that you have to let go of people who aren't ready to be with you. We want to cajole them, we want to convince them how great we are, why they should be with us. But again, this is a really, really self-destructive dynamic where we're continuing to go after the
But you
unavailable,
do
the
bear
unavailable.
witness and stand in the breach. You do speak
You
out.
try, you try,
If it takes civil disobedience, you do it that way.
you try.
And as Cornell would put it with Ella Fitzgerald, we'll go out and he's swinging with grace and a smile.
Well, as long as, Jim, I want to say this as the therapist here, as long as you are not hurting yourself, as long as you're not being self-destructive and destructive and self-sabotaging. Well, listen,
Ella understood that.
well,
she was able to take all that crap and leave us with a smile, with grace, and beautiful music.
well, we
That's what
don't we don't know what happened to Ella when she got home after dealing with a lot of crap. But it is 3:57. It is now 3:58 here in New York City. Thank you so much for engaging as you always do. And I want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in. And I want to leave you with my two weekly messages, very important messages that I hope you're going to take in. And the first, of course, is to do everything possible to be aware of living your life in ways that are in your best interest. So you have to ask yourself during the course of the day, is this good? Am I being good to myself? And of course, secondly, which of course, Jim and I continue to talk about off the air and on air, is that we have to all try to do a much, much, much better job in learning to accept and even learning to love each other and to be willing to engage in differences. And I still am of the mindset that it is important for all of us to have discourse leading to a win-win resolution. It would certainly make, if possible, it would certainly make for a kinder and gentler and more loving world. So listen, have a very, very good rest of the day. And I will talk with you next week and every week on Mondays from the 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on the Ask Beatty Show on the Progressive Radio Network. So take care of yourself. Let's take care of others. And we'll talk next week. Bye-bye, everybody.